Hello everyone, welcome, thanks for joining us today. I'm Vicky Spratt, housing correspondent at the iPaper, where I have the job of reporting on the housing crisis. I've been doing that for over a decade now. That's everything from the crisis in private renting to the social housing shortage, the crisis in temporary accommodation, and now the mortgage rates crisis. And I think it's fair to say that we are experiencing the housing crisis like never before. This is worse than when we left the ERM because people pay more for their homes now and they borrow more. This is more entrenched than what happened in 2008 because house prices have hit historic highs since then. And building homes is one of the only ways out of it.
Not the only way.
Interruptions already. Interruptions already. We haven't even begun.
But we haven't got through.
We haven't. Okay, I'm so sorry, sir, but we are going to have to continue because we've only got an hour. But please ask your question at the end. Building homes is, in my opinion, one of the key ways out of this. What tenure? Lots of people disagree on. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how building housing and getting the right housing can bolster the economy, which is not in the best state. Now, I've got a big panel today, one of the biggest I've ever sat on.
No one said no, clearly.
which is unusual, and also perhaps testament to how important this issue is. I mean, I think it is the issue that we face as a country. Intersects with lots of other problems. We might disagree on the ways of fixing it, but it is the issue of the moment. So I'm going to introduce this panel. I've got Ben Everitt MP, Chair of the Housing Market and Housing Delivery APPG, Councillor Jane MacBean, an advisory board member for the Conservative Environment Network, Kate Henderson, Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, Nicholas Boys-Smith, Founding Director of Create Streets and Chair of the Office for Place, Geeta Nanda, OBE, Chief Executive, Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, Bartek, Senior Researcher at Bright Blue, and Fiddaman, Chief Executive of Karbon Homes. I'm going to give everybody a chance to say their bit, and then we will go to questions. Should we start with you, Ben?
Lovely, thank you very much. Look, this is not the first housing gig I've done in this conference. In fact, I've done quite a few. The key thing that has made them all a pleasure to be at has been that it's been absolutely packed. It's, look, standing room only. Been doing housing gigs in conference for the last few years, and we've not packed rooms out like we have done this year. The time has come to have this conversation about housing. This is the rock and roll. This is the issue of the moment, and I believe that we are actually on the cusp of not solving the problem, but getting the political will to solve the problem, which ultimately is key to this. It's important. You know, we've got a generation of people who we need to be able to get themselves, not just on the property ladder, get themselves in property. You know, we've got 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds still living with their parents. So it's really important for our community, for our society, and dare I say it, for all the Conservative Party, the party in government, to resolve this issue. Fundamental. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of aspects of the housing crisis, and I think we're probably going to be talking particularly about increasing supply, which is key to this issue. But the elephant in the room, and before this chap interrupts again, is the existing stock as well. We do need to make sure that when we do interventions onto the supply side, it works with mobility from the existing stock, and that involves building the right houses in the right place at the right time, but also things like addressing stamp duty so that people can move between existing stock and new stock. On the economics, and this is the key point I want to make, we have a golden opportunity with all the billions and billions of pounds that the government is spending on levelling up. In fact, it went up by $1 billion this weekend. You know, it was sort of $4.5 billion on levelling up. It's now $5.5 billion, and that's through the Towns Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the High Streets Fund. All of this money is going into left behind areas to create opportunities. Opportunities mean jobs. Jobs are done by people, and people live in houses. if we don't put the right kind of houses in the right places to support this billions of pounds of investment, it will be unsustainable. We'll effectively be creating economic activity that people commute to and then back from, that don't leave a lasting, sustainable impression in the communities that we are aiming to level up. So the housing is a crucial part of the levelling up mix. We can't talk about levelling up without talking about housing. The problem that successive governments have learned to appreciate at the cost of the market and the people trying to live in houses is that housing is the biggest, hardest, longest, most politically contentious part of that policy mix to deliver. But now is the time to address that housing supply issue.
Great, thank you. Chris, would you like to?
I'm next. Oh, right, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I was actually just trying to write down and answer the question. The question we have in front of us all, so I thought I'd be, not just say what I was going to say anyway and answer it. How housing can bolster British prosperity. Housing can bolster British prosperity by having enough of it in the right places, in popular and lovable places, and by, over time, spreading the amount of the country where there is demand to be met, as opposed to a mismatch between where there's too much demand and too little. Point one. Just to step back a bit, what makes us happy? What makes us prosperous? A life where we have a sense of purpose, where we have loving relationships, where we are economically under control, and where our jobs are challenging but not overwhelming. That's actually the good society, according to lots of psychological research. And housing at the moment, rather the lack of housing, is a very, very material detriment for far too many of us, particularly the young, particularly less prosperous, in being able to achieve that. So again, how can it bolster British prosperity? Well, first of all, if there was enough of it, it would be less expensive, and it is now a very, very material impact, really up and down the salary and wage scale on disposable income. So the amount of, this is slightly old figures, that have got worse since, the amount of income that tenants spend on their housing in London a generation ago was about 15%. That's now gone up to over 40%. That's a really material impact, and that's the more prosperous end of the market. It's worse elsewhere. If you were a young person now, your chances of owning a home have now gone below your chances if you were born in the 1920s. So we've literally gone back a century, which is not, I think, good, whatever your politics and view. There's a very, one of my favourite quotes is from a post-war politician in MacLeod: "You cannot ask man to stand on their own 2 feet if you give them no ground to stand on." So it's not just a thing that we're losing disposable income. I think we're actually, in the young generation, or those who can't see their way to sustainable ownership or even sustainable tenure, we're actually losing that long-term stake in society. I think there's probably an existential, and I'll defer to Ben and Conservative MPs around the panel, that's certainly an existential threat, I suspect, for the Conservative Party. I think it's actually much worse than that. I think it's about society more broadly. So that second point about the underpinning of housing and prosperity. Third point, and there's a brilliant essay which you haven't read, I recommend, by Samuel Bowman and others, called Housing Theory of Anything, which goes into this in more detail than I can now. But the lack of housing fundamentally undermines our labour market flexibility. You cannot, it's getting much harder to put the right person in the right job because there just aren't homes to go for. So that means that maybe a more senior, more experienced person isn't able to delegate stuff to new people joining the team because the new people can't join the team. And it means, this is going to sound sort of superficial, but it's really important that the cost of subsidiary services, the plumber, the this, the that, starts going up because you're having to pay for the fact the plumber can't live there and it's having to drive in from Hertfordshire or wherever it might be. So there's all these consequences hitting our prosperity and our productivity, and I'm afraid it gets worse. Now, this is something that economists argue about forever, and they'll never resolve this, but there is very clearly now suppressed household formation as a consequence of high housing costs. It's something you can never prove to 5 decimal points because you're literally arguing about sort of models for what hasn't happened. So how much, let's not even try and get into it, but it's certainly happening. I think that is now. So it's really clear. And then the final economic point, and then I'm going to say one thing about the answer, and then I'll shush, I promise, Madam Chair. We are undermining the necessary agglomeration effects of place. So, although there are a few exceptions and outliers, places like Silicon Valley, the broad brush of economic evidence across the world is that when you can create places of what I call gentle density, with a mix of places to live, places to shop, places to work, places you want to be, places you might be there during the day for work and in the evening for fun, in the morning to take your kids to school or whatever it might be, you maximise the agglomeration effects of people, productivity and pleasure, whereby you end up having a coffee with someone who works for one of your competitors or in a neighbouring industry, and you get that idea and something happens. We're undermining that right now. What was brilliant about Manchester, where we are today, what was brilliant about the British economy 100, 150, 200 years ago, is we had literally hundreds of towns and cities that were doing this. We're now draining that lifeblood out of our places through our lack of housing and lack of productive places. So I'm not going to give a full answer, but I'm going to go run through what I think the answer has in it. I won't have time to go through them in detail, but if you want to, you can come back in the questions. So where and then how. Where we need to do the following things. We need to get better, and mechanisms have been worked through, at gently densifying and intensifying existing places that are already prosperous and have unmet demand. We need to get better, less at building new towns, but at probably more predominantly extending some existing places of unmet demand. Thirdly, we need to work out what we're going to do with what I call boxland, which are the acres and acres of drive-to single-storey sheds, of which there are staggering amounts, not just going down the M1 or down other motorways, but actually in much of London, in much of other cities where the land value should in principle be pricing them out, but isn't because of planning use constraints. And then finally, which is more about regen and quality rather than supply per se, is we need to fall back in love with many of our left behind towns and places, the Rochdales, the Sunderlands, the Grimsbys, where actually if they could be spinning at the speed of a really prosperous and productive and popular place, that the amount of potential there for more lives lived productively and happily is just, I won't say it's infinite, it's not, but it's huge unmet, there's a huge capacity there. So that's where, and then a quick thing on how, and then I'll shush. So at heart of it is changing, or continuing to change, because actually good changes are now starting to happen, is continuing to change the way we run the planning system. We've been running a controlled experiment over the last 70 years of pushing the democracy down into every single development control decision, as opposed to pulling it up into the local plan. Ladies and gentlemen, if you choose to do something uniquely, and it's better than everywhere else, well done you've made a good discovery. I think we can now report back after our 70 years controlled experiment, it's not going well. And we, by the way, there may be free marketeers in the room because it's a Tory conference, but the state has always intervened in land markets and in regulation of the built environment because there are externalities. If I live in house A and Ben lives in house B and I have thatched roof on it, and my house burns down, it'll probably burn down his as well. You could come back at me in common law in the 12th century, but the City of London decided that wasn't a very efficient way of doing it, so they just banned thatched roofs because it was simpler. So it's all, and we've literally done this for thousands and thousands of years. So we need to start just being a little bit clearer, clear quality asks, pulling the democracy forward in the local plan, but as long as you meet that crack on. We also need to think about the tax system. We've got this massive VAT disincentive between regen, refurb versus new build, and there are also disincentives for existing landowners to stay involved with their land as it gets developed. They're essentially fiscally incentivised to just option or sell it off to a house builder. I'll stop there. I could go on, but that's probably more than enough already. I hope that's helpful.
You took on planning, which was brave. Jane.
Talking of planning, so I've been a local councillor for the best part of a decade, and all that time I've sat on a local planning committee and have the scars to prove it. So it's not just politically contentious, it's obviously sometimes physically contentious, and we deal with the most difficult issues. I have to say our planning system has changed over the last few years, especially. When I first started on a planning committee, we were encouraged not to have any contact with our planning officers or any applicants or objectors, and it was very firm lines. That doesn't happen anymore. I almost find myself being mediator between community, planning officers, developers, and I think that's a positive thing, because actually we're getting some more homes built when officers are being a little rigid or a little nervous about something, but also we can have real conversations about NIMBYism and manage expectations within the community, address concerns and actually get development through. It is still very difficult, so I'm very much from the local perspective. My other hats include sitting on the board of the Conservative Environment Network. I'm very well known for my environmental work. I live in Buckinghamshire, sunny Bucks-on-Sea as I call it. It is a beautiful, beautiful county. It's very different. In the south of the county, we are an outer suburb of London, essentially, and everything that comes with it. We're zone 9 on the tube line. We've got increasing demand for housing and we've got nowhere to put it. We've got very beautiful picturesque villages and towns, but we are constrained by Greenbelt, and we're very proud of that, and we are fighting desperately to make sure that we do not have all our settlements blurring into one huge urban sprawl, and it's very important. The north of the county, one of my colleagues at the back of the room, I'll mind my P's and Q's, Mark, very, very different. It's incredibly rural, but they don't have greenbelt, and therefore they are building 50-odd thousand houses for the rest of the county. And I lived abroad for a couple of years, came home, went to drive up the A41 and went, "Call blimey, this is no longer a rural track. There are thousands of houses here." And I've seen how that landscape has changed, sometimes for the better, delivering houses. I also have 22-year-old twin girls who just finished their masters, moved home, are unemployed, lying on my sofa, I can guarantee today. I love them dearly, but I really do want them to get out of my house. My husband and I have become very accustomed to doing what we want to do, not being dictated to. But joking apart, you know, we're quite fortunate. We've got a nest egg, they've got a deposit, but they will never live in the south of England. And it's interesting that as 22-year-olds who've been at university in Loughborough and Nottingham, they don't want to live in the southeast. They don't want to live in London. They think there are far more exciting cities. One wants to go to Bath, one wants to head back up north, and we've got a lot of family in the north. And I think that's a really important conversation we need to have as a country. And I echo about these lost towns. I stood in Gateshead in the 2019 election. Some of my colleagues are here. And there is huge potential to actually breathe new life into some of our towns that need investment in terms of jobs, regeneration. And we have to find that balance with the southeast. You know, I think we don't want HS2. I've got a vent shaft and a head shaft in the North Portal in my ward, and it's utter carnage. I'm all about infrastructure, but let's put it in the right place. We don't need a third runway at Heathrow. We need to develop. Ben Houchen's doing amazing work developing Teesside Airport. Some of our other regional airports can be developed, create jobs. And so we've got to have that difficult discussion about how much is London-centric and south-east-centric, and we've got to shift it north. I'm very keen on environment. I am keen on the detail, and everything I do is about the devil is in the detail. You know, we've seen nutrient neutrality being reversed. Well, that's all well and good in many places, but we have protected chalk streams in our town. And if you walk halfway along our river, there is turgid brown sludge being pumped into a protected stream. We've got a sewage treatment works that overspills every time it rains, and I have 30,000 residents who are furious. So we've spent 10 years lobbying, and we've got £16 million worth of improvements. So we can get that money, and we can get the infrastructure improvements, but we need a strong local plan to do it. We don't have one. So as a town, Chesham, infamous Chesham, we've been working very hard with Create Streets. We are a national pilot project. Oh, yeah, well, we'll come on to that. But we've been working very hard with them. We are a pilot project for DLUC. We've had £250,000 of funding, which is a lot of money for a largish town. We have created a design code. We've got 4 or 5 neighbourhood development orders, and it's fantastic work. We've involved the town right from the start, and that is key, involving the community, making them part of the conversation, giving them the detail and informing them, and they are incredibly well informed now and understand about what they want for their town. They're embracing 4-5 Story in the town centre for the first time. They're embracing the Regen project. Everyone's behind it. They want a bit more detail about where we're going to put multi-storey. Is it going to affect green space or the river? But actually, it's a really positive journey. My concerns, and it's a shame Mr. Gover's not here today because I had some questions for him, how do we scale that up across the country? How do we give £250,000 to every single parish across the country? That's a big bill. And also my other concern, working with a planning committee, we are under-resourced. We train planning officers, and London very kindly nick them and pay them London waiting, and so we've got a constant churn of officers, and we've never got enough resource. Those NDO, those neighbourhood development orders, we are looking at knocking down parts of our town, rebuilding, gentle densification, but they are essentially outline planning permissions. So while we're currently going through some consultation, as we go through Reg 18, as we go through referendum, I need a dedicated planning team to look at those NDOs and take them through the planning process so that they can then go to referendum alongside our neighbourhood plan. And we just don't have the resource. So this is what we're fighting on the ground, and that detail is crucial to the success of the work that Nicholas is doing. And all I would say is communication is key with all of your stakeholders.
Great, thank you.
Kate.
Thank you. And it's great to see such a level of interest in housing, and we need this level of interest not just to be within the party conferences, but actually at the ballot box when it comes to the next election. It's really, really important that we have an offer on housing that meets the needs of everyone. Just a very brief kind of introduction to National Housing Federation. So we are the voice of housing associations in England. They're not-for-profit social landlords who own and manage 2.7 million homes to around 6 million people in England. And most people know what a housing association is. We provide homes for people on lower incomes, but we also do lots more than the bricks and mortar. So housing associations provide accommodation for people who are leaving care, for people who are leaving prison, for people who are fleeing domestic abuse, for people who've been experiencing homelessness, for adults with disabilities, for people who are older and have care needs. And we're a really important part of the fabric of society. We're also major developers, so housing associations are responsible for around 1 in 4 of all new homes built, including almost all new social and affordable homes. And we're big employers. We do lots of training and apprenticeships, and we represent around 1% of GDP. So that's a bit about the sector and here we are. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the housing crisis. Now, I think we all hear statistics about the housing crisis, every day. And Vicky just talked about, whether it's the impact of mortgage rates or the levels of homelessness. I think the statistics that really, really hit me in the gut are the ones around children. There are 2 million children in this country living in overcrowded, unaffordable, unsuitable homes. And the number of children living in temporary accommodation has almost doubled in the past decade. That's kids living in a B&B, having to do your homework on the floor, having to share a kitchen or a bathroom with strangers. We need to do a lot better. The costs of the housing crisis also fall on the public purse. We've got housing benefits subsidising sky-high rents in the private rented sector. The police, the NHS, the courts, they're treating the symptoms of the housing crisis every day. And it just doesn't have to be this way. We can do better. So for us, we would really like to see a positive long-term plan for housing for all the parties going into this next election. And I think we do need to know our housing need levels. I think we do need big numbers. But actually, that's where there's a really conflictual debate. It isn't just about big numbers. It's about giving people life chances. So I think when we talk about housing, we want to frame that debate around the outcomes we want to see, which is really good. Imagine a society where we don't have any families holed up in temporary accommodation. Wouldn't that be a great outcome at the end of the next parliament? Or having a really strong economic driver on the role that housing plays to supporting local and national economies? Or the role of housing and our built environment in delivering net zero? There are massive, massive opportunities here, and I think we need to reframe the terms of the debate so that we can give everybody hope and ultimately everybody a home that they can afford, whether that's somebody who needs a social home or whether that's somebody who wants to be a first-time buyer. But there needs to be an offer for everyone, and at the moment that feels like it's missing. So that's my call, is for a long-term plan for housing.
Great, thank you. And we could have a society without anyone in temporary accommodation. We could do that. Geeta.
Thanks, and I agree. I'm a housing associate. I'm not a housing associate, but I represent a housing association, Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and we have just under 60,000 homes. We operate in London, we operate in the wider South East, we go into Cambridge and then into Derby and Nottingham. So we have a whole range of housing and a whole range of housing markets. And when people talk about the housing crisis and a long-term plan, it's absolutely real. Having worked in housing probably for 35 years now, we've seen problems with rough sleeping, problems with temporary accommodation, markets come and go, but actually what we've got at the moment is all of it. And I've got a 25 and a 27-year-old living at home, and my one of them, this is in London, spent 6 months trying to rent somewhere, 6 months offering a year's rent up in advance, writing a CV, going at within 10 minutes of a property coming up on search to try and get somewhere to rent. Gave up and is still living at home, said I'll try again in another 6 months' time. For them, it is very real. But I have a mother who is 90, and at the other end of the scale is in, she owns her own home. but needs something different. She's getting much more frail and needs something different. And I think we talk a lot about young people, but we also need to talk about older people and how we can have more options for older people in terms of older people housing to free up accommodation. I was in a session earlier, I heard a fantastic statistic around Japan, and it was that they build 850,000 homes a year, and they've got a declining population. So we are not building enough homes. They don't have a problem in terms of housing supply. I think immediately, when we think about what's happening here and now, we are in a crisis because there are, nobody is building any homes. Housing associations are having to reduce what they're building. House builders are reducing what they're building. Because of interest rates in the market, investors coming into that build-to-rent sector are pausing whilst things happen. And what happened last time is, when we had the great financial crisis, is we had a lack of skills. And my real worry is if we don't have something now which helps us through this correction, because we do need that period. We know things will correct and they will stabilise, but we definitely need something now which is going to help us. And it used to be that rental was counter-cyclical, we could build more homes, but because of the need to spend more on our existing stock and the model that is out there in terms of building new housing for housing associations, local authorities, or anybody in the affordable housing spaces, it's much harder. So how do we do some things immediately to try and get some of that being built and some of that correction going on, I think is really important for us. I think, I think mentioned about, we can't we haven't got any statistics around how it's changing formations of households in terms of the housing crisis. Well, we've done some research as Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and we did that with young people and talked about housing and how it's impacting on them. And 4 out of 5 of the young people said that it was impacting the decisions they make. It was impacting their mental health and housing affordability. 4 out of 5 said that it's affecting their life decisions, such as having children. So we have got real research in, talking to our young people around the impact it's having on the decisions that they are making. And I think, business says it constantly. It's impacting on recruitment, it's impacting on retention, it's impacting on productivity, it's impacting on skills, and housing will help that. Housing will definitely help that. And I think in terms of the contribution, just some figures, just from us as one housing association, that a social tenancy contributes a huge amount to our economy and society. So for us as a housing association, it's around 713 million a year to the UK economy. 287 million of that is through building new homes, and we build around 1,200 homes a year. But also 162 million through health and wellbeing outcomes, saving the NHS and local authorities. So it's about good housing, giving good outcomes, and also education as well. So I think there's a huge body of evidence saying we need to invest more in affordable housing. We need to invest more in all housing because the markets all link in together. And it will positively impact on life outcomes. And it will positively impact on the economy, and it will positively impact on business ability to recruit and retain and allow the growth that we need as an economy as well.
Great, thank you. And I really hear that on how it's impacting young people's life choices. I'm 35. I don't have children because I don't know if I can afford my mortgage and kids. Support them. Could I help them buy a house? That's something lots of my friends who don't come from wealth are worried about. And we know that people are having children later, and I think this is a huge part of that. Bartek.
Thank you very much, Vicky. So I am from Bright Blue, and if you are here, you presumably know who we are, but in case you don't, we are a centre-right, liberal, conservative think tank, and we do a lot of stuff on housing. And I actually wrote those questions here, so you would think that I know the answers, but actually no, I wrote them because I don't know the answers, otherwise I wouldn't ask them, but I will do my best. So one thing I want to talk about is numbers. there are a lot of good people in this country who are fighting for us to build 300,000 homes a year. But the fact is that we have not reached this number since 1977. So it seems like it's a big number. And as a matter of fact, between 2008 and 2018, we have not even hit 200,000. So it's no wonder that you get all this talk in the media about the housing numbers, and there are people opposing it, and 300,000 seems like so much. But 300,000 actually isn't enough. Even if we were building 300,000 homes a year, we would only be building 4.4 homes per every 1,000 people in this country. Austria, they're building 6.5. Poland, France, Ireland, they're building over 5. So we wouldn't even be getting at those levels even if we reached 300,000 homes a year. Oh, and by the way, 40,000 homes a year in Poland every year are actually being built by Polish builders who used to be here and have gone back since Brexit. Somebody told me that anyway. Maybe he lied. And the other thing about those countries actually is that they don't have the backlog that we do. So according to, I think, Create Streets actually, we have a backlog of 4 million homes in this country. We would need 4 million more homes for our housing supply to meet housing demand. At current, even if we were building 300,000 homes a year, it would take 15 years to clear this backlog, right? And we're not going to build 300,000 homes a year. Ben was talking earlier about how there is more political will to build nowadays, but this is ambitious. So what do we do if it's just politically so difficult to build so many homes, and it would, even if we were building them, it would take so many years to solve this mess? What do we do? Well, in the short term, and this might be an unpopular answer in centre-right circles, I think we need some kind of demand-side policy. I think we need to make homes cheaper for the people who really need them, and this is something actually that is so much more politically palatable because. Even if today Rishi came out and said we are doing an enormous house building program, we are doing 500,000 homes every single year, whatever it takes, the prices wouldn't change very much by the time of the next election, and the voters wouldn't take notice. On the other hand, if you announced the demand side schemes, prices would change overnight, so the voters would react. And I think demand-side schemes get a bad rep because in the past they have not worked perfectly. A lot of the value was captured by developers, and a lot of people weren't able to access them, and it resulted in inflation. But it doesn't have to be this way. And there are too many young people in this country, and actually old people as well, who my parents actually don't even own a house, right? So who cannot afford a home. Bright Blue actually did a polling report the other day where the consistent theme was that the one thing that is weaved from the concerns of young people in this country is housing. The one policy they want the most is cheaper homes for young buyers. One of the top 2 priorities in this country is housing. So we need to solve this now. We cannot be waiting two decades or perhaps even more to build the right homes we need. We do need to do that. It's absolutely imperative that we do it. But in the meantime, we also need those short-term solutions. And I still have a little bit of time. So I'm also going to talk about beauty and about placemaking. Sometimes people say, maybe not in this room actually, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit because this is Conservative Party conference, but sometimes people say that beauty actually doesn't matter, that it's a kind of side concern. If something is ugly, then so be it. It's important that it's there. It's a bizarre view for me because beauty seems to me to be one of those 3 things that are important intrinsically. It would be so bizarre for somebody to turn around and say, well, it's not important if this is a good person. Obviously, it's the only important thing about them. It's not important if this is a true statement. No, the truth of a statement is the only important thing about it. And one of the things that is important about things in general is that they are beautiful. Things should be beautiful just because beauty by itself is valuable. But even if you're not convinced by this, beauty has also so many extrinsic good things about it. Beauty leads to placemaking, beauty leads to communities. People, you get better places if those places are beautiful. People are willing to walk around, people are willing to look around, people are willing to sit down to communicate with each other. They will be reacting to the kind of the place they live in, right? If you live somewhere beautiful, you don't want to destroy it. You want to take care of it. You have local pride, right? You have a sense of place. And sometimes people say, well, all good talking about beauty, but it's subjective. So what can you do about it? Well, there are actually some things you can do about it. policy exchange a few months ago. They released this thing they call the placemaking matrix, and there it's basically a grid of things that outlines how to make places, not just developments, how to make places, and beauty is a big thing there. And they actually explain what makes things beautiful, and those are agreeable things. And some people might disagree, but maybe those people are wrong. Aristotle thought that your taste in beauty reflects your taste in virtue, and there are obviously bad virtues, right? If somebody thinks that greed is a virtue, then they are wrong. Well, so some people just have a bad taste in art, and maybe we should ignore them. And this placemaking matrix that I mentioned isn't perfect, but there are a lot of good ideas right there. So one of the things they mention, right, is benches. I live in East London. I need to go walk for miles to find a bench, and I haven't seen any benches in Manchester actually while I've been here. And it's so easy to make a bench, right? I could make one. I like carpentry. They could get me to do some. Just pop them up, and then people can go out. They can have a walk. When they're tired, they can sit down. They can socialize. Their benches are great, and they're cheap, and it's really not difficult to make benches. So why don't we have benches? Let's just have benches. I suspect it's actually because of anti-homeless infrastructure, and because people are scared that homeless people will sleep on those benches. But that's another can of worms, which I'm not going to open. And the last thing I'll say about this is that people might say, well, Bartek, this whole beauty matrix, good, but you're just putting more things into the NPPF. You are introducing more planning guidance. Planning guidance there's already too much. We don't need any more of it. Well, I sympathize with this argument, but there's another side to it, because sometimes by actually having more guidance, you're providing more clarity. What we've seen over the last few months with Mr. Gove is that he's been rejecting developments on the basis of them not being beautiful enough. And then developers have turned around and they've basically gone, what the hell? Why? How has this happened? I knew nothing about this. Well, it's because we actually haven't explained to them what a sense of place is, what makes for a beautiful place. And in this case, actually having more in the planning, not necessarily the NPPF, but in general, in terms of the advice we give them in terms of planning, would provide that clarity, and it would streamline the planning process, right? So it wouldn't make it more complicated. I would actually argue that it would make it easier for them to go through the planning process. And I've spoken for too long now, so I'll finish.
I was about to stop you. Lots of very interesting points there. The impact of Brexit on house building, why just building homes won't bring the price of houses down. Let's remember Help to Buy, a scheme that I actually did, and now I've got a mortgage and a big loan and an expensive house. So I think there's lots to pick up on there. And beauty does matter. I mean, perhaps it's subjective, but I don't want to make myself too unpopular in the room, but I was interviewing Jeremy Corbyn last week, and actually he said a lot of the same things that this panel have said today, and I think that's really interesting as well. Last but not least, Paul.
Chair, one of the benefits of going last at the end of a long line like this is everybody's already said most of what I plan to say, so I can afford to be relatively brief, I think. Karbon Homes is a housing association. We operate across the northeastern Yorkshire. We have about 32,000 homes, and we build about 600 new homes a year. So that's just so you know where I'm coming from. When I thought about the question, and like Nicholas, I was inclined to want to try and answer it, I thought about it in kind of at three different levels, really, and there's a quite literal level, isn't there? How can housing contribute to British prosperity? Well, housing is an industry, isn't it? And it has a GVA, and it contributes massively to the country's economy. So construction generally adds about 6% to GVA, about 124 billion. And if we accept some of the numbers, and I totally acknowledge Bartek's criticism of some of the numbers that are bandied about, but if we accept there's a need to effectively double the number of houses that the UK produces, if you take into account the multiplier effect of that activity, potentially delivers another 200 billion in GVA. So it's a massive, massive contribution. And think about that in terms of all the jobs it creates and all the skills it can encourage and all of that. So that's one level to it. The second level to it was the prosperity of individual people living in Britain. And we've heard very eloquent testimony from other panel members about the impact of both rising interest rates and the ever-increasing spiral of private rented rents. and the impact that has on individuals. I operate in the affordable housing sector, where a combination of cost of living crisis, rising energy costs, rising rents, and all the rest of it means that people are making incredibly difficult decisions. So we're standing in the way, if we don't resolve this problem of housing cost, we're standing in the way of the prosperity of huge swathes of our population, and that can't be right, can it? And then I thought about it probably in similar terms to Nicholas's session, which was in terms of housing as a foundation and a fundamental building block for people to go on and build their own successful futures. So there is probably no aspect of a person's life which is not touched by their housing circumstances. So we know that people in difficult housing circumstances are likely to underachieve in education, they're going to have worse health outcomes, and there's a whole range of other things we could cite which are going to be impacted by people's challenges in terms of the affordability of the housing offer that we give to them. So I think there's a huge amount more that we need to do to deliver a system that meets those different needs across those different aspects of people's life. I unsurprisingly support Kate's view that we need a long-term plan on this. I would probably go a little further, and I would say a long-term plan for housing probably needs to live within the context of a broader long-term plan which thinks about targeted economic growth and thinks about the infrastructure that's needed to support that, housing being a key component of that. We have lots of research that demonstrates that a lack of good quality affordable housing is an inhibitor to economic growth. We know this, and yet we still don't deal with it in a systemic way. So absolutely agree with that. And then to translate that into well-defined local plans which recognise local housing issues and needs. We don't build enough accommodation for our older residents because the planning system doesn't target that. It lets the market rip, and the market can't get density from building bungalows and therefore doesn't build them. So you end up, if you don't have well-structured local plans, you end up building the wrong stuff. And we all acknowledge on the panel that you need to build the right stuff in the right locations of the right quality. So I think that's an important component of it as well. And just finally from me, this is electorally important as well. I'm part of a membership organisation called Homes for the North. We've just commissioned some polling, and it is clear from the results of that housing is an important issue on the doorstep. People do believe the nation needs more homes. People do believe that the nation needs more affordable homes. And people do believe that we aren't currently doing enough as a country to meet that unmet need. So lots of reasons why housing can and should contribute to a more prosperous Britain. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Interesting to hear you talk also about the need for a long-term plan. We will come to you shortly. I'm just going to reflect on what everybody said very quickly, if that's okay. I think we've answered a question which is actually not the question posed by the panel, which is how is the housing crisis harming prosperity? Unaffordable housing is causing huge problems for our society. I think everybody on the panel has spoken to that. And just to give a couple of examples of how we fix it and bolster prosperity, which all of the panellists have also spoken about. I was in Cornwall recently, where they're building a new garden village near Truro. Talk about placemaking. They are building an 8K road with infrastructure, new schools. At one end is a hospital that already exists, huge football pitches. It's going to be 3,500 homes. They've compulsorily purchased land. They've consulted on the design based on what I've seen. I mean, I think the idea of beauty is subjective, but they will look great, I think, and they're in a valley. It's nutrient neutral. This can be done, and those homes will be affordable, and they will go to local people. They won't become second homes. I mean, we haven't touched on that aspect of all of this today. So this can be done. I've also been to Grimsby, which Nicholas referenced. You have the opposite problem there. You have homes, poor quality stock that's been allowed to deteriorate, rented out by private landlords in awful condition, and a place that's been completely decimated and left behind. So we know how to fix this. I think everybody's spoken to that. Build really, really good quality affordable homes in the right places and state intervention has come up several times. Interestingly, the left also agree on that. But whenever I do these panels, there's always agreement, and then I don't see any of it reflected in the manifestos. So we know what to do, but the question is anyone going to do it? And on that, I think let's go to some questions in the room. Gentlemen in the second row, you are absolutely first.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm Tony Johnson. I was a councillor in Stockport, and I'm interested in housing, and particularly because I bought a house 50 years ago when the multiple of was 4.25 times average salary. So I'd just like to point out that it isn't just a matter of building more houses. It's actually looking at the existing housing stock, because what we really want, I'm 83, what I'm looking for is actually supported accommodation for the future, so that my house, 4-bedroom house, can be released for families. We need we're allowing a 25% discount for so many people to actually ensure that houses are not utilised properly, and we're also giving on inheritance tax an allowance of 125,000 to encourage people to still stay in accommodation. I'd quite like to live in a supported tenancy run by a housing association where I pay a rent, where there is health and social care on site, where there is dining facility, where there is less likelihood to go to hospital if I get support. Loneliness is less likely, and that is my ideal. And it is possible, certainly I'm in Greater Manchester, and there is no shortage of money for housing. You may or may not know that the 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester own Manchester Airport and also Stanmore and West Midlands. So the money is there to actually resolve the issues. And I'd like housing associations to build the supported tenancies so that there could be a release of appropriate housing for families, and works down so that the young people can buy houses. And so it's not just buying new, it's new but the appropriate housing, and that's got to be supported tenancies. Okay.
Thank you.
So I hope you were listening there.
Well said.
Is the existing housing stock?
Shall we? We'll respond to this, and then we'll do the next question. So
Yeah,
Jane and Ben.
certainly from a local council point of view, I think you're absolutely right. So as well as sitting on planning, I chair our Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee for Buckinghamshire, and I also chair a joint one across 3 counties. We do need to have serious, realistic conversations with developers about the type of houses we need. So we're a large town in Bucks. We do not need family homes. We have reams of Victorian terracing that needs to be better insulated so we can get families' bills down. We have massive problems. That brings massive problems with parking, so we need to overcome that. We have hundreds of elderly residents, and in 10, 20 years' time, I might even be one of them, who they're not ready to go into the kind of assisted living you're talking about, but they'd all love a lovely luxury apartment in our town centre so they can wander to the coffee shop, wander to their GP surgery, and actually what that will do is get people out of the family homes where they're rattling around in a 4-bedroom house, get the churn going through, and then we need very small, nice apartments for people like my kids who actually want to get a foot on the ladder. So there's 2 different types of apartments, and that's absolutely what we're doing with Create Streets. We're designing buildings, and some of them are mixed use, but with an eye on the future, multi-storey car parks. We're actually designing them so that they can, when everyone's buying into a car share club rather than owning a car, or we're all teleporting in 20 years' time, who knows, or floating on hoverboards. We won't need so much parking, we won't need the multi-stories, and we can actually convert them back into luxury or basic apartments and meet that need. But also, it's not just about the housing, we need everything that goes with it. We have not got enough GP appointments available, we're not planning. So our social care committee has just started a rapid review into how we plan future healthcare specifically, but it's the same for education and everything else. You cannot build 500,000 houses and not build a community centre where a GP can go in as a locum, give some appointments. You've got a dispensary, you've got a community hall for the Girl Guides, and you've got some other facilities. Someone can come in and support elderly people and very young mums within the local community, reducing cost to all the authorities, care closer to home, care within the community, and therefore we haven't got people travelling and they're staying at home for longer, which is where they thrive and live healthier lives.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question because we are running out of time. Lady in the purple cardigan.
Thank you. Kira Box from Friends of the Earth. Shockingly, I am going to ask about insulation and about heating our homes in ways that are sustainable and linked with the government's net zero strategy and with the need to tackle climate change. I think it's also really important for people that their homes are warm, that they are safe to live in, and that they are cheap and easy to heat. So I was really interested actually in what Bartek was saying about the need for more guidance and the way in which guidance can help developers to make better homes that are better and cheaper for people. And I wonder what guidance would the panel bring in for new homes to make them better insulated and more sustainable to run and cheaper to run, but also what guidance would you bring in terms of retrofit for existing housing stock to ensure that everyone can benefit from homes that are cheaper and warmer and climate friendly?
Thanks for that, and very timely, as Rishi Sunak said that landlords won't need to be upgrading their EPC. Who'd like to take this? Kate?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, from a housing association perspective, our biggest issue isn't new build. It's we can build net zero new homes. It's around the existing stock. And I mentioned we've got 2.7 million homes managed by housing associations. Around 70% of our homes are already EPCC, and that's because we've been working over many years with support from government on retrofit. We have the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and I think one of the things that was announced yesterday by the Secretary of State for Energy Security was a top-up to that funding. It's really, really important that we continue to make sure that we retrofit social homes. These are homes for people on the lowest incomes. But not just that, we have the ability to scale up. We have every housing type in social housing. We're in every part of the country. If we can work with residents to build up their confidence, to show that this makes their home healthier, quieter to be in, more comfortable, we can hopefully build up consumer confidence for other 10 years. But there is a long way to go with retrofitting. I think the thing in terms of guidance, though, would be to have a proactive, permissive planning system on that front. So from the projects that we've got going so far, there's quite different consents happening in different areas, and actually this should be something that we really support. Just very quickly on your point around supported housing, it's exactly what housing associations can, should and want to do. I'm looking at Paul. I've been to a wonderful extra care scheme near Durham where there's a hairdressers, there's social activities, there's a restaurant. It's and it's freed up loads of family homes. It's beautiful, wonderful. We need to do more of that, but we need, one, proactive local government to say that they want it, and two, we need to pay people who work in care better. And at the moment, the system that we have for paying care is broken. It's very, very short term in terms of revenue funding. So we have capital funding in our affordable homes programme for this type of activity, but we don't have the revenue funding we need. So that's going to be one of our asks for the autumn statement, and hopefully actually something in terms of, if we want to alleviate pressures on the NHS as well, we really need to support social care better.
Thank you. Okay, let's take two, and we might be out of time.
Hi, thanks for all the great ideas on the supply side. My question was more on the demand side. There's lots of trends of things like more single-person households, obviously higher immigration, people owning second homes, all of which are causing an issue. And to what extent do people have ideas of how we might fix some of those? And then quickly on the supply side, nobody talked about building up, particularly in cities, which might be an opportunity.
I did.
Great. And then white jacket. Yes.
I'm Jo from the Centre for Ageing Better. I'm also a young person who's managed to get on the housing ladder thanks to shared ownership, so I appreciate what housing associations do. My question isn't actually about shared ownership, it's about housing quality. So it's good to be at a panel where so many issues around the housing crisis are discussed, and housing quality is often overlooked. It's such a small part of government policy, even though we have some of the oldest and poorest quality homes in Europe. And on prosperity, we recently published a report showing that about 600 million in investment could unlock up to 10 billion of economic benefits. And I'm interested in what the panellists would want to see on improving poor quality homes, but particularly outside of the social housing sector, because that's the only area where we currently kind of have any levers or schemes.
Great. Okay. Well, on demand, let's go to you, Ben.
Thank you. So, I know we're running out of time, so I'll be quick and blunt. More demand-side reform without a considerable supply-side package would be utterly insane. Utterly insane. Because we are in the pickle we are in now, because we have had decades of tinkering around with demand-side reform. And the consequences has not been to long-term reduced prices. There may have been a little injection of state subsidy to artificially bring prices down, which tends to go into the pocket of developers and builders and so on. But the net effect of squirting more demand into a system with suppressed supply is to push away affordability. Yeah. So it would be nuts, beyond nuts, to do more demand-side reform without sorting out the supply side. Now, I say this having not seen what Michael Gove said earlier. So
nothing
so
about this.
Desperately hope.
No, he announced nothing.
Excellent. Good work, because that is better than announcing demand-side reforms. And on shared ownership, there is a role to play to supporting every form of tenure in the housing ecosystem, right from supporting councils to build more council houses, right through to the ultimate goal of home ownership, because you just don't grow a homeowner overnight. Nobody gets their A-levels and goes, right, that's it, A-levels done, off to buy a house. It doesn't work like that, and frankly, it never has. So we need all these different types of tenure, affordable housing, private rented, shared ownership, build to rent, buy to rent, or key worker schemes. All of this needs to be recognised as an important part of the ecosystem and supported, but with more supply.
Great. And then, Nicholas, do you want to take quality?
Yeah, I mean, the quality of, I mean, Chair, you said that sort of, that beauty is subjective.
That wasn't me, that was Kant.
Okay, well, I apologise. I'll take the bright. So look, two things. Where we want to live, where we're happy, where we tend to be more prosperous, where we tend to know more of our neighbours, where we tend to breathe cleaner air. Ultimately, I mean, at an individual level, there is subjectivity, clearly. Give me one person and I wouldn't tell you with confidence what they'll say. Give me 100 people, there's loads of work, pricing, revealed preference, stated preference, behavioural studies, boom, 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 boom. I've literally written books on it. Give me 100 people and you can say what between 70 and 90 of them do prefer most of the time, most situations. There is a cultural overlay. There's certainly a climatic overlay. So what works in Marrakesh, it's not quite the same as what works in Stockholm. But the types of places, the types of house, the types of home in which most of us prosper are very predictable. It's very hard to fix that without having enough housing coming into the system. I would very much echo Ben. Without fundamentally resolving that undersupply and getting the supply more evenly distributed around the country, it's hard to fix that. So the data tends to show, and because we've got such an old way of regulating our market, and because we're uniquely reliant on the large house builders, that's not in any way to criticise the large house builders, but we do need to grow a much richer SME, self-build, custom build, CLT market. And the research says, with some exceptions, because some of the big house builders are pretty good, some less so, that on the whole people prefer the houses they get built themselves, local builder. And that the path to quality is actually having enough supply so there's a proper competition of tenure and typology and self-building customers.
So a market operates like a market?
Ultimately, yeah.
Okay, we are out of time. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to give Paul, Geeta and Bartek a chance to say one thing you would do tomorrow if you could. because you guys haven't had a chance to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I think it's related to the long-term plan idea. I think I'd like to see us much more active in developing a vision for what housing should look like and providing a system of funding that will deliver that.
Great. Thank you, Geeta.
Housing in the manifesto, so I would like to see some promises around how we're actually going to, all of this, you know, is around more supply, better homes, etc. So how are we going to do it and how are we going to prioritise it? And I know there's lots of priorities, I'm not denying that, but I do think put it in there.
Some good stuff in the Labour manifesto, which I have already seen. So I'm excited to hear what the Tories have in store for us. And Bartek?
Well, it's difficult to choose only one.
Just one.
If I had to choose only one,
Quickly.
I would build in the Greenbelt.
Mic drop at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed.